in this new wave of technologies, whether broadly speaking, large language models, where we're not totally certain of the capability half the time because it keeps changing. I think one aspect is figuring out how to experiment early and not anchor too much. Like you can try something 1 month and it won't work. And this is not a period of history where you can then just write that off as it won't work, right? You come back a month later and it might work, or 2 months later. And so I guess from a leadership perspective, being able to figure out how to have sort of continuous experimentation, continuous learning, most of the time you won't get a clear, straight adoption. Like, here's my ROI, here's my 5-year plan, here's how we're going to roll it out. I mean, 5 years is just a lifetime in the way that this stuff is developing at the moment. So figuring out how your organization can do fairly early, fairly low risk experiments, if nothing else, as a way to improve or educate your workforce.
And delighted to say we are live for another episode of Being Human with Alastair Moore. Alastair has a PhD in computer vision from UCL, on the precursors of this, what we're now experiencing as an AI boom. He's the co-founder with another of our recent guests, Daniel Hume of Satalia, which was one of the early AI businesses in the UK, serving businesses like Coca-Cola and Tesco's on major efficiency problems. He continues to be involved in the startup community, mentoring other founders, as well as teaching at UCL and at Peking University in China on the MBA for technology strategy. He's now got a new startup at deepflow.com. Alastair, a huge warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So as I was saying to you before we came on, what I'd love to do in terms of our conversation is talk a bit about the founding of Satalia and the background of that, and some of the leadership lessons from your experience building that team. Secondly, to talk a little bit more about the current landscape of where we're at with AI today. And then finally, some speculation about what the future looks like in terms of both the broader AI landscape and specifically the future of work and what leadership might look like in that context. So yeah, can you start us off with the beginnings of Satalia and where that idea came from, and the genesis there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess you've already had Dan on the show. So Satalia came about through, trying to apply, algorithms, certain types of algorithms to business problems. We were looking at discrete optimization, broadly speaking. So, and that manifests itself ultimately into things like vehicle routing and staff rostering and scheduling. It was before the advent of these kind of deep models that now sort of dominate some of the sorts of outputs of things that people would call AI. But AI, or machine learning specifically, is a very sort of general class of problems that allows you to, adapt some input to some output. And so in reality, they're just used all over the place now. So, our first ever client was a telco. And I can't even remember exactly what we were solving for them. But, we were, they gave us a problem that was taking them like 4 days to solve. And we turned it into 1,000th of a second. And everyone was a bit like, oh, okay, well, so that's not really a problem anymore then, is it? So yeah, the journey from sort of academia and a general class of algorithms and, some expertise in sort of how to apply them, through to identifying early stage commercial projects that have some value, and then figuring out how to deliver an end solution, and so on and so forth. It's a fairly well trodden path in some sense.
Right. And in terms of you personally, Alastair, what challenges did you come up against as you took your first steps in terms of building a team and dealing with clients? And building out
Yeah,
Satalia.
I guess your academic or scientific training doesn't give you much background in that. I mean, I've been doing, I ran or been involved in lots and lots of businesses prior to doing a PhD. So I guess I had some sort of background in, general commercial activity, whether that is running bars or, running teams in moving furniture or you name it, right? It's like age 14 onwards. I've always been doing something. But, learning to sell, learning to pitch for money, learning to structure, resource allocation type issues is not something that you necessarily do whilst trying to figure out what your minor contribution will be to the frontier of knowledge. So there is a lot to learn and there's a lot to learn starting something from scratch. Obviously, like most people don't end up starting something from scratch either. Most people work in businesses that already have some operating model, some clients, some market. So like starting something where you don't know who your clients are, you don't know how to serve or identify what their needs are, and you don't know how to deliver. It's entrepreneurship is a slightly different skill set in trying to be able to operate on sort of maximal uncertainty. You don't really know anything about anything when you're starting.
Right.
Have some vague ideas, and then you got to do a lot of knocking on doors.
And what was the toughest moment for you in building it out, and how did you overcome that?
I think toughest, invariably building a company are always personal and people type issues. Like most of your problems with a scaling company. I think Dan tells this, anecdote about your biggest problem always being like something that happened at the Christmas party between two of your employees that then blows up into the. And it's like, just give us technical problems to solve. It's fine. But managing teams of people, and I guess if I think about my current startup, Deepflow, like managing teams of people and machines as we increasingly use machines to do stuff is a difficult optimization problem in its own right. And most of our techniques are kind of post-war operations research. There's just like lists of stuff that needs doing. And then there's like some component of management, which is just like make certain that the list gets done. And that will start to change, I guess, as we move into this era of like machine being able to assist, if nothing else, in more and more of the activity.
Right. And but in terms of it sounds like it wasn't something where you had serious crises in terms of getting Satalia going. Would that be true?
No, that's not true. Like there's perennial crises in a startup. You're very close to death most of the time. And yeah, I think one of Paul Graham's posts is like, every startup dies at least 8 times. So, I guess by the time you're on your 3rd or your 4th death episode, you could become a bit hardened to it. It's like, okay, let's figure out how to deal with this. Whether that's like a key client, canceling a contract, or it's like, a key technical deliverable not working on time. Again, like in an early stage company, you don't have the inertia of a big company, right? Not many things can go wrong without it being a crisis. So there's different problems.
And what did you draw on in those crises then? What is it that had you keep going and be functional and effective?
That is a good question. I don't necessarily know the answer to that. I think you just need a lot of determination and a lot of, you keep getting up and keep getting on with it. Like there's certain thing, Dan sleeping on the floor in the office regularly, and that's that sort of thing, right?
Right.
But again, those kind of war stories, there's a degree of PTSD, right? You sort of figure out how to not remember them. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep doing stuff.
But it sounds to me that you had a certain level of sort of unconscious competence or capability in that regard that you just
I think arguably. So I think some of that is innate. I think some of that actually is is some sort of selected for by a PhD,
Okay.
in the sense of like being, PhD work is lonely. You basically only rely on yourself. So there's a degree of like, if you can get through that, it doesn't give you any skills for the other things you might have to do, but it does give you a degree of self-confidence and self-determinism that perhaps you don't find in other walks of life.
I hadn't considered that. That's very true, and different to anything you experience in other forms of academic study pre-work.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. So, I mean, yeah,
Because
PhD is
even a
quite different.
degree where you've got a level of autonomy, you've still got most of it fed to you most of the time.
Yeah, I don't wish to disparage, I guess, lower degrees, but like your undergrad is just spoon fed to you. Like if you turn up, you'll pass. Like most people that, not unfairly, most people that don't pass have all sorts of problems, whether, family or resourcing, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
And then masters is much harder than undergrad because it's so compressed in terms of like the number of things you have to learn in such a short period of time. But again, if you turn up, you'll pass. Broadly speaking. So PhD is quite different. I think, I'd have to double check the stats on this, but I think only 30% of people that start a PhD complete it.
Right.
So the dropout rate is high.
Right. And you were studying it. Were you with Daniel there at UCL at the same time?
Yeah, yes. Although actually we met at London Business School. So I guess back in the day, there was a program that London Business School and UCL collaborated on to train, I guess, scientists in some part of an MBA. So we actually met on an LBS course on new venture development, which is like my first experience of business teaching, full stop.
Okay.
And I loved it, actually. It's like, they're sitting in a room talking about, some aspects of the world that I can vaguely understand, not an hour into a Blackboard derivative proof of like some maths. Like, it's like, people sit around and talk about stuff. I was like, this is quite fun, actually.
And that so that sort of started to sow a seed that, maybe I could go into business. Was that where that happened?
Yeah. So like Satalia's first ever business plan, which probably looked nothing like the final business, but we did that at London Business School as part of an MBA assignment, effectively.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
And then it happened. Was it just the two of you? It started Satalia?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there were people involved all the way through the journey, but I guess two co-founders in that sense. Perhaps that's also unfair. We got a lot of support from the TTO office at UCL. And we had support of head of department. It's also very early on. Now, I guess, Professor Sir Anthony Finkelstein, who's gone on to do a lot of other things as well.
Wow. Okay. And then, and you built it, you scaled it, and then you sold it to WPP. How long ago now?
It was about 5 years ago.
Right.
Although, I played very little role in that. I was a bit of a, Dan led on acquisition completely. In fact, part of the condition of sale was that I stepped down. I'm like, why have you got this weird guy? Like, does all these other things. That can't be right. So
I see. Okay.
I'd be doing lots of different things by that point. I helped set up a machine learning team in Mishcon, which is a law firm. I set up a master's program. Although, to be fair, Dan sort of set up this master's program and then made me run part of it. So I blame Dan for that one too. And I'm still teaching there. So yeah, there's 10 years of teaching on this master's program at UCL.
So you clearly love the teaching.
I am clearly still teaching after 10 years.
You're not ready to say you love it.
It's not the same thing, yeah.
It's tolerable.
It's tolerable. Yeah, and it makes, hopefully provide some nominal value to my students, and they certainly provide some value to me. Right. Yeah, actually, do I love the craft of teaching? Not like some of my colleagues. Like some people genuinely enjoy it. I kind of suffer through it, I think, a little bit.
There's an enormous sense of duty to be doing. Probably, I'm sure
Yeah.
you don't need to in terms of financially. I'm sure there are more lucrative ways you could be spending your hours.
There are more lucrative ways that you could spend your time than doing lecturing.
So, so there's something keeping you in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
So
honestly, in the last, maybe not 10 years, but certainly the last 5 years, the rate of change is so dramatic that trying to teach stuff keeps you sort of honest because the world keeps changing. You keep getting forced to like alter your worldview.
Right.
It's not like, most of the stuff you teach is the same, but like a good 20, 30% of it over this period of time in the sort of advancement of the field means that like, there's something keeping you honest about trying to keep updating teaching material. Like, oh, that's not quite true anymore. That's wrong. That was true last year, but it's not this year.
Yeah,
So,
they hadn't thought of that. That must be a fascinating place to be teaching in, a field to be teaching. So okay, so you've built up Satalia. You're doing all of these other things as well. But one question I'm curious about is for those who seem to be successful in adopting AI, what were the traits, leadership traits, or organizational traits of those enterprises that seem to do best in terms of making use of these technologies?
I think that's quite a difficult question over the time period, right? I mean, Satalia, we were building our initial solution to things in sort of 2008, 2009. Quite different in some sense. In this new wave of technologies, whether broadly speaking, large language models, where we're not totally certain of the capability half the time, because it keeps changing. I think one aspect is figuring out how to experiment early, and not anchor too much. Like you can try something 1 month and it won't work. And this is not a period of history where you can then just write that off as it won't work, right? You come back a month later and it might work, or 2 months later. And so like that ability to constantly reevaluate a technology as it sort of changes, underneath you. It's like building on sifting sands at the moment. So I guess from a leadership perspective, being able to figure out how to have sort of continuous experimentation, continuous learning, you're not going to get a clear, most of the time, you won't get a clear, straight adoption. Like, here's my ROI, here's my 5-year plan, here's how we're going to roll it out. I mean, 5 years is just a lifetime in the way that this stuff is developing at the moment. So figuring out how your organization can do fairly early, fairly low risk experiments, if nothing else, as a way to improve or educate your workforce, right? It's not very clear what the playbook is a lot of the time, actually, at the moment. So that would be my advice and guidance on that front.
Yeah, and I think something else you've said important there, which is perhaps differs from the past, is even if it fails, it only means it's failed this month. Right?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your opinion, it's sort of true at the moment. Certainly quarterly, you should like come back. And so, it forces you to get into good habits. Like if you know that this is going to improve over a fairly short period of time, then, if you don't know, put it this way, right? If you don't know how to test whether it's working or not for a problem of this interest to you, that in itself is a problem, right?
You're right.
So your first thing would be like to find out a series of things that, were it to be good at it, it would be very useful. And even if it fails on it, at least when you get a new model release or a new improvement, you can go back and say, okay, does it work on this now? And the answer still might be no, but you will have a useful mechanism or piece of machinery for doing weak signals, if nothing else, right? Do we still believe this to be true? And the answer is, well, if the answer is yes, it still doesn't work, that's good.
Yes, and that's a very important point, especially for established businesses, because where startups may be trying that iteratively all the time. If you're if you've not set up a way to systematically ask yourself, where could this make a difference for us? And do we know if it right now is capable of making a difference? There's a risk that there
I
will
think
be
there's
people outside of your organization doing exactly that.
there will be people outside your organization doing that, and there'll be people. I guess another one is there'll be people in your supply chain doing exactly that. So obviously, huge generalization because in terms of types of businesses, but you're seeing lots of businesses where the like long tail of small work, right? Something that might have been outsourced, that takes one of your agencies or one of your let's stick to the word supplier, but takes them an hour. Like that might just be done by the model now. Like I'm talking to lots of companies in the economy that are maybe like small tier agencies, creative agencies, consultancies, you name it, in almost all aspects of work, and like they're not losing significant chunks of work where the client wants to outsource risk in some sense, but they're losing a long tail of things that might cost less than £1,000, and then that adds up over a year. I was speaking to companies out that have lost 25% of their revenue in the last 15, 18 months. So, this is already having a material impact on the economy. Like we're not really necessarily seeing it yet in lots of different ways. But if you imagine that across your business, or again, depending on your business, if you imagine that across where you get work from. So I often say like, figure out what it could do for you, and then also figure out what it could do for someone else. Like you need to not be quite so myopic on just like, oh yeah, well, that would be brilliant for us because then we can do this. You're like, yeah, but you might not get to do that anymore. Like,
Right.
like someone else does that for you now, like, instead of you now. So yeah, definitely a time to try and be agile in your appraisal of like what the possible is.
Yeah. The other reason that we talk about before we came on was, and what I'd love to get your perspective on, is the China-US angle. And so I was first made aware of this when I saw something online about how this was from a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, who was quoted as saying 80% of the US AI startups that they're seeing are using Chinese open source models, not US models, and how we may be seeing over time the dominance of China in this space rather than the US models. What's your sense of that, and where the landscape sits?
I think it's very early in any of this. US probably has a slight lead in large scale foundation models. China probably didn't invest. China's kind of big tech companies, Tencent, Baidu, like probably didn't invest enough in the last couple of years. They did a lot of share buybacks. So they, on the other hand, like this, ignore the China US thing for the moment. There is a interesting tension between open and closed models. There are sort of well developed open models in software. If you think about Red Hat or so on and so forth. It's less clear exactly how the open models might develop in the AI setting, because you spend a lot of energy and therefore money making the model itself. But you also need to spend and use energy for using the model. And so exactly how open source it plays is still to be factored in. But I think there's a tension there, which is obviously they were birthed or they came into the world as products in their own right, in some sense, right? If you think about the difference between ChatGPT 3 to 4. But they well may just be critical infrastructure in the way that we think about electricity or roads. And so China is now on this kind of AI plus trajectory of trying to make AI background critical infrastructure by 2035, so 10 years. And if we think that, if you go back to Adam Smith, right, you go back to the idea of the who pays for the road to the market, right, in terms of how do you amortize the cost of creating a market. we've got the same issues now. Like if you can't do anything materially in an economy without having access to a model within a decade, then, how do you build a market model for that is an open question. And it probably isn't only large US corporate interests that frame that question, right? There are issues around AI sovereignty. There are issues around where small open models play a role and when a large centralized model as a piece of infrastructure plays a role, and so on. So we don't really know the answer to any of these things yet.
Right. Okay. No, this is getting me thinking real time, and because the other angle on this is the nature of capitalism in China versus the US. And in China, it's more state directed. There's a greater emphasis on building up the nation than necessarily.
Well, not a greater emphasis, an absolute emphasis. Yeah.
All right, an absolute emphasis.
Yeah.
And do you think do you sense that that's going to put them in an advantageous position in terms of building?
I think advantageous is again too early to tell. Like there are differences in the structure of those economies. One with more centralized control and one with less centralized control in some sense. If you ignore the politics of it, I think there will be some advantages in certain sectors from having more top-down mandate for change, right? For controlled disruption. Whether that's healthcare or that's education and so on and so forth. So there will be some advantages to both systems. Like I guess the US system is going to run harder and faster early on and perhaps deal with the downstream consequences of some of the displacement in a fairly turbulent fashion. and if you migrate east and you go through European models and into Chinese models, there's probably the other end of the spectrum of that is being able to control and mandate exactly how and where this technology diffuses and how fast, and try and control for some of the societal consequences in a top-down fashion.
Right. And okay, so I can appreciate that. And in terms of building an ecosystem of businesses able to access the capabilities of AI, as a whole, in terms of the entirety of the economy, does the Chinese model offer sort of faster growth across the piece for an AI enabled business landscape?
If you ignore the recent changes in language model performance or model performance, I guess China was developing a better series of capabilities on diffusing machine learning systems at scale, right? So they were building, by virtue of size of population, if nothing else, in the market, they were building better is the wrong word. They were building more scalable adaptive systems for things like, recommendation engines, etc., and shopping and fulfillment and so on and so forth. Again, these models, for those of your listeners, like I'm going to use an analogy here to IQ, which human IQ, which is wrong and impoverished and a gross oversimplification, but will hopefully hit home just how strange. If you haven't used a language model, or you don't have an app with access to a language model, or you're only using the free tier and not the $20 or the $200, like we went from building machines with a sort of comparative IQ of 40 in 22, 23 to 100 in 23, 24 to 120 to 150 in like 24, 25. Like you're seeing Fields Medal winners. So, the Nobel Prize of Mathematics, Fields Medal winners now producing new theorems using language models. Like frontier science is being done by AI in a way that it wasn't 2 years ago. And so if you think about what the structural effect of this will be at some point on the economy, it's giant, right? Any knowledge work up to 2022, any knowledge work would have necessarily had to be done by a person.
Yes.
And now some percentage of that work definitely doesn't have to be done by a person, right?
Right.
And so that is an unimaginable change in a very short period of time. And, I guess I don't really see any evidence at the moment that will stop short term, let's say 5 years, possibly I would argue 10 years. You won't see a slowdown in both the improvement in capabilities and the diffusion of those capabilities into the real economy. So you're just starting to see it hit some of the jobs figures in terms of graduate recruitment.
Yeah.
Lots of companies doing hiring freezes. Looks like, again, disentangling numbers from the general economic climate is difficult, but you're looking at probably a 6 to 8% reduction in graduate employment this year.
Yeah.
Material changes in what it means to do something. So I mean, in terms of having said that, those are broad socio-technical economic changes that are going to happen to everyone. What's the difference between the US and the Chinese economies? I guess you've seen a whole load of sort of trade and embargoes and sanctions brought in by the US administration, and that has slowed large-scale adoption of AI on the Chinese side to a certain extent. But it has also mandated, I guess what they say, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you've actually seen the Chinese engineering shift around the access to chips and reimagine how some of the software stack worked. One of the big changes you've seen was DeepSeek, which again, if you've followed any of this literature, people will be aware of an open source Chinese model having sort of comparative performance to, say, a GPT-4 level algorithm. Now, in China, lots of companies, let alone citizens, had no real access to a model of that level until DeepSeek came out, because they didn't have access to the American models. Now they do. I've just come back from Shanghai.
Is that because China blocks them?
Not mandated. So again, you can do all sorts of games with firewalls and VPNs,
right.
But if you're a normal participant in the Chinese economy, you wouldn't have had access to American models, and now you have access to, after this innovation in the kind of software layer, you do have access to these sorts of behaviors. And so just starting to see a wave post Chinese open source comparative model in terms of their adoption or the diffusion of that tech into their economy properly.
Right.
So again, these things are happening in real time. A year old. Crazy.
Right. But it sounds to me like you're not seeing any sort of necessarily inherent enabler in the US, in the Chinese ecosystem that's going to mean that China can out-compete America because of its focus on open source. And
I don't know that I don't know that I agree with that, but I would reframe it slightly. So if you think of this as a new road infrastructure in terms of making markets and forcing adoption, the forced adoption of AI as a market maker and a background enabler of everything might happen faster in China than it does in the US. For example, only because it could be mandated in a way that it can't. So you're relying on the US having a reasonable amount of diffuse uptake, and I guess in a market only model, people aren't willing. Toki's voting for Christmas. People aren't going to willingly just allow these models to check. Oh yeah, no, your job doesn't exist anymore. Actually, no, I think it does. So how Ludditism works on both societies, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see happen. I sort of expect more blowback on the US side and more managed and therefore, arguably less technology blowback on the Chinese side in some sense, which might sound a bit counterintuitive, but we'll see.
Right. But also, presumably, there's a bigger state provision for those losing their jobs as a result of AI.
Correct. This requires us to seriously think about what the social contract is. I mean, to take the UK, right? The UK knowledge work only, for the sake of argument, and you train for, the upper middle class is the social contract is you train for a long period of time to build up expertise, and as a result of developing that expertise, you will have a larger share of wealth in the economy, give or take.
Yeah.
Hugely crude characterization of what it is, but and now that is like, actually, we don't need 20 years to become an expert lawyer in X or a diagnostician in Y. Like, the model will do that. And you were like, yeah, but where's my? Wait a minute, where's my livelihood? What do I do? And so, I think it's the beginnings of taking expertise as a differentiator seriously in a way that we haven't before. Like in the other societal shifts, mostly you have moved up the sort of cognitive stack, and you've done higher order tasks, and you've done things that become more abstract, more cerebral, and ultimately capture value that way. Now, if you're getting squeezed both at the top and the bottom by the machine, so that there's a narrowing set of things where your expertise and judgment will play a role, then obviously, like the way people find value and the way people earn a living is going to shift dramatically. And I think to a certain extent that might affect China less short term, because it's still an economy based on manufacturing.
Right.
Again, broadly speaking, right? It's still building things as opposed to just, managing and giving expertise. Now, these models are going to do management and expertise incredibly well in relatively short. Are they there now? Absolutely not. Like, are they as good as an expert lawyer or an expert in anything? No.
Yeah.
But the barrier to them becoming expert, I believe, is probably quite low. So you're like looking at the machine being able to do most knowledge work by 2030. That means like people not going to a lawyer in the first instance because they just like have an argument over a party wall, right? And so they just do arbitration between two neighbors, and they're both happy to take the model output rather than go to, there's like that small work, right, in the economy. And then there is like insourcing, which is like, actually my legal team will get, pass their own final judgment, my general counsel, but I don't need to send this body of work out to a third party law firm to like do the 80% of it before coming back to it. So I'll get the machine to do the 80%, and then I'll still do the 20%, but I'll do it in-house. Then you got that sort of Coasian boundary of, famous economists from LSE from the 30s, but like, where does work get shared to and supported by what firms? Like, that's going to change. So you're going to see a lot more verticalization, a lot less stratification of roles. Like, we have this company that does this and this, focuses and specializes in that and does that. Like, if the model, the thing that's weird about the model is if the model can do, one thing well, let's remove perfect, right? Let's just say it gets 80% correct. But it also means it can get the thing above it sort of 80 or 70% correct, and the thing below it 80 or 70% correct. And so suddenly you're like, oh, so all of these things that we think of as disparate processes, so sort of like amalgamated, give or take. And so, think, if you again come back to leadership. So one was experiment. Two is like, pick off something that if it worked is high value enough that you can make the justification of investment, ROI. Right. So you don't just don't do all of the small stuff. Like, try and pick off a couple of big things where it's worth investing and learning to like figure out how to do it. And then there is, I think, the third thing is equally important, which is like, what does new look like? This is not about doing something just slightly more efficiently than you currently do. This is about reimagining how large bits of a process may or may not work.
Yeah.
Right? And where the machine can do it and where the machine can't do it, and which bits are regulated and the person has to do it. But like, you need to carve out enough time to reimagine how stuff will work, not just replicate the way something currently works with the model. Is, I guess, the beginnings of a thesis on what you need to think about. And you have a very short period of time, right? You've got less than 5 years.
Yeah.
Which in decision cycles is It's tomorrow.
Right. Absolutely. And okay, so if we take the case then that a very large proportion of current knowledge work becomes done by these models, are you
Let's call it partially. So I'm not suggesting for a second that everything is done, and obviously we don't want everything to be done, but like a large proportion of things that are currently called knowledge work are capable of being done by machine, even before perhaps we let the machine do it.
Yeah. And that, yeah. And in some sense, if you think about this historically, there was a period in time where almost no one did knowledge work. And now we're at a period in history where large proportions of, especially Western people in Western society, are engaged in knowledge work. And so it doesn't seem inconceivable to me that then goes away again and, seeds ground to something else. And so have you started to think about what is a post-knowledge work economy?
A little bit. So I think that lots of things that we currently think of as people's hobbies or people's, hobbies are the wrong word, but like someone works in a charity or they do, they I think there'll be a tranche or a tier of what we then think of as work, which is under-resourced social infrastructure, right? Whether that is teaching or caring or monitoring, or very few people play a active role in local politics for the sake of argument, right? Why? Because like people aren't necessarily motivated to, and they don't necessarily have a time to worry about it anyway. Now, like there's probably a whole load of stuff that is what people do in their evenings, or people do at their weekends, or people take time off work to do, and that suddenly becomes more primary, or that takes primacy over the things that we currently think of as work. Now, under a capitalist model, how do you restructure those incentives and sort of capital mechanisms to make those valuable and make them wealth generating in a way that they don't quite at the moment? Again, like to take your analogy, which I haven't thought through properly, but at one point most people didn't do knowledge work, and then people started to do knowledge work because it was the differentiator. Like, how do social structures for people's interactions with other people go from being, nice to have, but no one actually spends any time on them to like, these are now critical fabric of society that everyone's involved in a way that they weren't before. Like, I think there's definitely a transition to be made. I don't have it figured out in my own head at all. And I don't think anyone else does either. No,
but I'm curious to obviously to ask you, given you've perhaps spent a bit more time speaking about this than most, but and are there new forms of human activity that we've previously been unable to conceive of that are now starting to emerge as possibilities for how we might use our time?
So I think there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of market activity which might be seen to be surplus to requirements, but is a product of our social or cultural interactions. Lots of things, arguably in the creative industries, whether it's fashion or music, or they don't have to be there in some meaningful sense, right? It's not to do with energy or shelter, right? They're there because people manifestly want. There is a market, there is value created. And so I think those things will abound, actually. Like, perhaps we've just only picked off a tiny layer of stuff where the social value is critical enough to create real value, because everyone else is trying to create real value, quote unquote, elsewhere, like, keeping the electricity on or keeping your car insured and so on and so forth. As people move up that stack, perhaps there's a ton of stuff that we haven't really even considered thinking about, in the way that no one worried about pricing, credit derivatives in
this
50.
I was starting to think about, social media managers didn't exist, in the 80s. It's so what that
but I think it's difficult to imagine in some sense, or conceive of, though, because most of the things you come up with at the top of your head are go up the cognitive stack and somehow, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, you could focus on this new thing and you could work out how to do that. You'd be, yeah, but the machine will work out how to do that. Like, you're like, oh no, but we could do this other new thing. And that way, no, the machine will do that too. And so there will obviously be value in ways currently unimagined that is discovered and valued. No one really worried about, to take your social media thing, right? No one really worried about TikTok influencers in the 80s. Like, how is that a job? Oh, yeah, but it is a job because like some people can, create wealth from it.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm not massively concerned about the absence of things to do, but I think how we go from there to here to there is not necessarily going to be straightforward.
Okay, so you're more optimistic than some that that we will have valuable, meaningful lives. We won't just have to be sort of sedated with with virtual reality.
I do think people will have valuable, meaningful lives. Yeah, in ways that we probably haven't considered yet.
Well, that's reassuring. So let's talk a little bit about Deep Flow. This is your new venture. What's the, to use the startup lingo, what's the hypothesis?
I guess the hypothesis at the moment is that like these models are improving in performance and they're very good, but they're sort of point solutions. Like my productivity as an individual is unimaginably different, right? I can do things that would in 23 would have taken me a couple of days, and I can do in an hour, right? Or I can do something that in a minute that would have taken me half an hour, and so on and so forth. So my individual productivity is absolutely there. Now I'm a bit of a power user. And so there's retraining and learning and like, why don't do it like that, do it like this. Like I'm teaching my son how to use a language model. And he's like, well, don't ask the question that way. And he's like, why not? And I was like, well, because the model won't really know what you're getting at. So it's like, you have to learn to communicate with the model in the way that you would have to learn to communicate with, another individual or a person or a child or so on and so forth. So, but after you've got over that, the model is very, very good. But you're not seeing the productivity manifest in organizations yet because the handoff between people and the model not doing like 100% of it correctly 100% of the time. So building a system at Deep Flow that allows you to sort of, where the model can do 80% of the stuff 80% correctly 80% of the time, how do you restructure? How do you build flows? Like how do you, and now, given that we know this is coming and that organizations are going to have to restructure over a 5 to 10 year period, how do we help you do that, right? You need to know what people can do and should continue to do. You're going to have to know where the machine should take over. You're going to have to sort of, I guess some of the ideas come from Satalia, actually. We built like staff rostering engines for like large consultancies and, how to assign people to projects. And I guess the same logic applies, which is like, well, now you're just going to assign machines. And by machine, I mean, resource to partially complete stuff. And then you're going to hand it over and you're going to have to bring the human or the person or the employee. Let's try and the human. You're going to have to bring them up to speed on like what it is, what's the context, why are they being asked to do it, why are they being asked to make a decision or what the judgment is and so on and so forth. And we just don't have any of that scaffolding. So I guess one of our theses is like, even if the models don't get any better, I mean, my view is that they will continue to get better. But even if they didn't get any better, there is still 10 years worth of like, improvement to be had in just figuring out how to fuse these models into our working environment and our organizational structures and the way that we delegate and the way that we monitor and the way that we govern, and so on and so forth. So those are the problems that Deep Flow is working on.
Right. Yeah. And as you just spoke there, I hadn't really considered that nuance in terms of managing AI. I suppose right now everybody gets a laptop and you don't really worry about portioning out their internet usage or exactly how much time they spend on a particular application.
Well, you do as a manager. You have an idea about how long it might take someone to do something. And okay, let's start with I guess two observations. Like one, obviously, at the moment, I think of the model as doing the thing, right? But the model will play a significant role in managing the doing of the thing, right? It's it's going to be able to absorb more contextual information than your human manager can, and it's going to have a reliability in terms of being able to double checking whether certain conditions are met or not than than your human manager, and so on and so forth. Our management tooling hasn't really evolved since post-war operations research, because almost all management techniques become like a to-do list. And that didn't matter because the latency in the system was the human being told to go away and do the to-do list. But if you look at the trajectory of these models, like at the moment, the model can do a task that is, say, like an hour or half a day. And, by the end of next year, it'll do a day. And the end of the year after that, it might be able to do a week. And the year after that, it might be able to do a month's work of full-time equivalent work. If I want to spin up a new marketing division in a morning and give it 50 people's worth of resource and tell it to go off and like work up a new geography and come back with the legal compliance issues and the demographic issues and like why some permutation of our product line could be restructured to like fit that new niche. We don't have the tooling to be able to do that. Right? If I give you 50 people's worth of work and say come back in 4 hours, now you as a human manager can't productively allocate 50 people's worth of work in that time period, nor check that it's being done correctly, nor like don't go this way, go this way. And so we have no tooling for an economy, an organization in an economy where a significant percentage of the work product is semi-automatable, and we are already at that stage. Like, so I guess one of our thesis is not that the models don't work. The models demonstrably work because I can sit there and do a million things I could never possibly do in 2023. So I know it's working.
But
it's not working for the organization yet, because, you're trying to like mesh this amazing technology into a set of antiquated practices. There's a Gary Hemmel quote, which I can't actually remember off the top of my head, but it's something like, your 20th century company is working on, your company is using 20th century technology with 19th century management practices with 18th century, objectives. So there's just such a disconnect with the way that we currently think about organizational structures. And it didn't matter because the human latency was the bottleneck that basically says we have systems that are, ostensibly 100 plus years old. Like now we've just gone through a phase transition or a threshold. Those assumptions that no longer hold. So, frontier science will be done by a machine. Frontier anything will be done by a machine in the comparatively near future. And then the question is like, okay, how do we control, govern, make best use of it, so on and so forth. So those are the sorts of interesting technical solutions that we're solving at Deepflow. How do you break a task into, or decompose a task into multiple different things where there's a high chance that some part of it will be auto-completed? We don't know how to do that. How do you do delegation across resources? So like, how do I assign this to multiple humans that have X capacity? Now that is a sort of a rostering problem, which I have some experience of. How do you do ad hoc teaming? How do I decide like which humans and machines should work on the same thing now, right? In today or later today, and then the consequences of that. How do we deal with things like skills atrophy? Like if I just get rid of all these technologies at the moment are incredibly brittle. Now, I guess I think that they will improve in brittleness, but if everyone stops doing what they're doing, therein lies another huge mess, right? So we need people to continue to do some of what they do now for the foreseeable future,
right?
And so, like again, you can't just go and delegate or automate everything. Right, your organization will become incredibly susceptible to all sorts of things that we haven't thought about yet. So, even if you want to adopt it for margin structure or, profitability or so on and so forth, like you probably can't. You have to like transition away from this human only workforce into this hybrid human machine workforce. Anyway, there you go. Those are the things we're working on.
No, that sounds fascinating. And you're right. It does throw up a new class of management problems that, we don't have infrastructure support. Yeah,
haven't been fully explored yet.
Yeah. I suppose the question on the human in the mix, and you've talked about AI being able to do even the frontier work. Well, is there a role for human intuition, for abductive thinking? This idea that humans can join dots across realms, that that AI can't do and can sort of tap into a wider infosphere, if you like, that a model can't?
So
Is that a role for them?
absolutely, up to a point. So, are all of those things that you mentioned, broadly speaking, applicable to this generation models? Yes. Like as the models get better though, and as the tech won't stand still. So it will start to be able to incorporate different sorts of information into its operating model on the fly, its world model itself. Like these models are incredibly, they're weird alien intelligences to a certain extent, right? They definitely don't work the way that humans do. They have huge access to certain sorts of information that a human doesn't, in terms of like, there's just not enough years in your lifetime to read as many books as the machine has quote unquote read. So they're very different. And that gives them advantages and disadvantages. You can't utilize them exactly the way that you would utilize a human at the moment. But on the other hand, like some of the ways we definitely utilize humans will become redundant in some sense, because there's just no way that the human ends up being better at a certain set of capabilities than the machine. Now, I guess your broader point, I think, is around things that we currently think of as human creativity or certain sorts of judgment, etc. And I think that is absolutely true today, but I think we're on the conveyor belt, a beginning of a process where it's not obvious to me that the machine won't be more creative than the human in lots of guises, but not least because the speed of iteration in the state space. Like take an example here. Like a creative agency before might have like, say the client's got a new brief. We're going to do a campaign around X, like come back with 3 or 4 propositions for me. Now, before the creative agency would go away and do that. Now you could give that to a machine and it could come back with 100 permutations, in less than an hour. And then you as the client can be like, okay, here's 100 things. Which ones do we like? Rather than having to be like, here's the 3 things we randomly happened upon. Like, so now you can change the means of production. You can change the decision making, and therefore you can change what counts as creativity. Right? Yeah, I can explore with the machine many more permutations more quickly, and then alter the way I filter and funnel and select and ultimately allocate resource to. And I think people can sort of see that intuitively in a way that you might come up with 100 images that would have been prohibitively expensive to get a human illustrator to do 100 of them. But I can get 100 of them, and I can still get the human to do the one I want in the end. But I've explored the permutations in a way that I couldn't possibly do. And that applies to anything, right? That would apply to marketing and research and, so on and so forth. And so, this just again, this is the reimagining what it means to run a process. Okay. Yeah. At the moment, we do it this way, ding, 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 because, reading was expensive, writing was expensive, like thinking was expensive. Zero marginal cost intelligence is going to radically alter the structure of lots of the way that the perceived wisdom of this is the way we do it.
Right. I suppose where I'm angling at with this question is, it comes back to human consciousness, and I suppose how we perceive human consciousness. I mean, if consciousness is limited to the brain processes inside my skull, then I think the idea that basically AI will be able to do it all, holds water. But if we say that human consciousness is broader than that and extends beyond, my brain, and I'm tapped into a universal consciousness at some level, and I have, through my brain as a sensor, if you like, able to tap into certain qualities of the broader human experience that I can then articulate in art or as an inspired idea or something of that nature, then I think it becomes slightly harder to make the case that for that class of sort of inspired insight, that AI could get there.
So I just don't think we know. I mean, if you want to talk about artificial consciousness, you should get Dan back on, because he's just launched a new institute for examining or exploring sentient machines. Now, I guess I stopped doing philosophy of mind and, let's say, the precursor to any neuroscience I would have done maybe 20 years ago. So I can't talk about the frontier of what is a mind or not a mind, and certainly not what a conscious mind would be. But I guess my working assumption is that lots, and it is an absolute assumption, but lots of aspects that we think might be attributable to human consciousness probably aren't. I think a lot of consciousness is post hoc justification. If you look at loads of studies in psychology, right, a lot of your conscious experience is post hoc justified and is arguably wrong and not often a very good mirror of reality. Now, it's obviously served some purpose, evolutionarily speaking. So, consciousness as a filter or consciousness as a reconstructor of the important bits of reality. We're at the very early stages of understanding any of that and what artificial versions of that would mean. But I think that if you're hanging your humanity hat on this being like a distinctive characteristic that will not fall in due course to natural inquiry. Like I'm not a dualist, right? I can't, if we think that there is only some version of materialism, at least in the way that we build and construct these models, then at some point we're likely to be able to build and construct artificial versions of these things that we think of at the moment as being integral to our own evolution.
Right.
So, have you carved out yourself another extra decade? Maybe. I doubt it. No. But who knows? Like I said, at this point.
Right. No. Thank you, both. It was
not least because, again, the no one really expected these models to work in quite the way they had. They have, right? The jump in performance in 2023, I would say, caught most people and most practitioners by surprise. And the change in performance is, again, caught most people by surprise. Like people that are experts in this field are now notoriously bad at underestimating the rate of change, right? It just keeps going in ways that you weren't necessarily anticipating. And so to hang your hat on, but they won't possibly be able to do X or Y, it's a dangerous game.
Oh, no. And I completely buy the thesis that, from my own personal experience, I don't even need to sort of, be persuaded by you on that one, that, there is, even if they stay where they're at, they're going to be hugely transformative for organizations and society at large. I mean, I certainly know that from my own experience. Yeah, as you described, there are tasks that might have taken me a day previously that I can now do for 7 minutes, or less, right? Like
now you sit there cursing the machine. You're like, what do you mean? It's 8 minutes into this thing. How damn you? Like, how can this not possibly be instant? Like, not interested in you thinking or working.
Yeah. And I started live as a management consultant, right? I cut my with Deloitte, and I can well see why we're seeing these large consultancies employing less people, because the type of desk-based research that would have taken me maybe a week, I could probably do with AI now in an afternoon, if that. So I do buy that. I suppose where I'm interested in is, I guess, is there something special about human consciousness and the way in which our meat suit allows us to connect into something beyond, if indeed that is the case.
So I mean,
I can't reach, and that's I guess my
not as someone particularly versed in this subject. I mean, it would appear that some aspects of our consciousness are materially different from lots of other living things, even if we want to attribute some sort of consciousness to other things close in our part of the animal kingdom, if nothing else. And we have no idea what that, to my understanding, no idea what that distinguishing characteristic of human consciousness would be at this point in time. So to suggest that we will just smoothly, or gracefully flow into a region of history where machines exhibit these emergent properties that we just happen to have, seems equally unlikely in some sense. Right? If you think about the history of life on the planet and the amount of time that the properties that you're talking about in terms of some higher order consciousness functions have existed would appear to be the blink of an eye. in terms
Right.
of, like, for most history on Earth, we haven't had that, which suggests that it should be, some special set of properties that we can't articulate at this point in time. And for them to materialize miraculously without ever designing for them in some sense would also seem to be slightly probably unlikely. So, perhaps there is a lot more time than we think. But I think there's an interesting way to think of it is a sort of behavioral, functional, cognitive differences, right? Does the person, machine, organism, whatever, exhibit the right sort of behavioral traits for me to attribute mental states to it? And we're already at that stage. So the Turing test is, statistically passed this year. So humans can't tell the difference between a language model and a human, given the experiment, given laboratory conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's like this sort of functional analysis, like does it not only does it behave in a way that we would anticipate, but it does it structurally in the sort of way that we would expect it to. So, and we don't really know that because we've got pretty poor functional understandings of the brain, at the moment. Again, I say this is not as not to disparage colleagues in neuroscience, but we're at an early stage in that science. And then you've got from a philosophical perspective, a cognitive interpretation, which not only is it exhibiting the right behavior and it's doing the right sorts of things in the right order, but it's doing it in a very specific subset of ways that we would like to then manifest these properties to. Now I have sat in, so Geoffrey Hinton, for example, who most people know as being involved in this for a long period of time. I sat in a lecture with him at UCL probably in 2008, 7 or something. And he is the first person who said, like, this is the mind of a machine. And he had a tiny machine. It was the only thing it did was like know the number or the digit 3. So he was presenting some work on a 3 machine. But he was like, I am legitimately showing you the mind of this 3 machine. And he's like, it's a mind with a very limited number of states and a very impoverished worldview. But so I think there are people out there that think that these machines now might have some sort of mind. Again, open question. We have no idea. But it might be that certain things that we attribute to consciousness are attributable to some sort of inorganic mind at a threshold below consciousness as well. Anyway, like I said, get Dan back on the show. He knows about this stuff.
No, but this is fascinating. Because I've been exploring consciousness a lot on the show, and two things come to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was a researcher in France who worked with chicks. The chicks have this imprinting phenomenon.
Yes.
Right? The first thing they see, they think is mummy, and so on. And so they didn't show these chicks a chicken mummy. They showed them a robot mummy. Right, the first thing they saw is this robot, which was programmed just to randomly move around this warehouse. But the chicks were able to affect the behavior of the robo mummy, such that it came closer to their pen more than could be predicted by chance. So, and they've done. That was quite an elaborate version of the experiment, but they've done it with humans trying to predict the output of random number generators using their will, and they're able to affect more ones and zeros and vice versa, with their will, so above statistical chance. So there's some suggestion that through our consciousness and through chicks' consciousness, we can affect the behavior of very simple machines, which to me begs the question, if indeed, as Hinton is suggesting, that we can create machines with some level of somewhat evolved minds beyond being able to generate noughts and ones or move in a random pattern on a warehouse floor, could we get to the point where we're able to manipulate AIs in quite sophisticated ways?
So again, I mean, this I think this comes down to we are way off track, but comes down to the aspects of the system that we may or may not know yet, right? So like Penrose, Roger Penrose is a physicist, has sort of linked certain conscious processes to quantum states or quantum behaviors in the brain. Now, obviously, the machines we're building at the moment aren't working off the basis of having access to quantum states. for the sake of argument, right? So again, like I'm not well versed in this literature. There is probably reality is at any point in history, mostly you don't know anything, right? So let's assume that for the time being, we mostly don't know anything that's relevant to having this conversation, and it's all yet to be discovered. But it seems like I guess I think that the thresholds for those properties of those systems probably aren't binary. There probably is some sort of sliding scale into the phenomena that manifest in systems that we would otherwise like to attribute consciousness to, and vice versa. So, I guess in most of human history, we've thought of it as, I've probably actually started off thinking unlike this, but they say the recent period of human history, we think of it as sort of binary. As like, human has conscious states and other things don't. Probably as our science of consciousness improves, we will have then a much more differentiated, nuanced understanding of the spectrum. If it turns out that chicks can affect robots in a paper that I haven't read up or I'm not endorsing or condoning at this point, then maybe that's a reality that we end up discovering. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, fair enough. I'm just going to bring it back down to the practical, just as we close out. So, a lot of stories recently. I think I mentioned you before we came on. This character, Michael Burry, who's famously predicted the 2008 crash.
The film's a great short or something, is it?
Yeah, he's put massive bets against Nvidia, which of course is one of the suppliers to the AI boom. Palantir, another AI-enabled business. So he's going short, as they say, on AI. And I think it's because he doesn't see the justification for the capital expenditure on AI infrastructure that a lot of these tech players are making, and questioning whether they can, monetize.
Well, I haven't read his thesis or analysis, so I don't know why he justified that. I mean, I can understand, like, Nvidia specifically has benefited largely from a monopolistic position that won't continue. So you saw like Google's Gemini is broadly speaking trained on TPUs. So Google is like not on an Nvidia stack and so on and so forth. So the chances that of like Nvidia maintaining its sole position as provider, medium term are zero. And if anything, the China, to revert to one of the issues discussed earlier, the China-US tension, one of the things it's forced China to do is get off Nvidia. So like the chances of the market not having new entrants in that part of the hardware layer stack are zero. So, you could short Nvidia for that alone, in the sense that like their monopolistic position is probably at its peak.
Right.
Because now you've got both new US entrants and new Chinese entrants. So at some point their market share will get eaten. Now, I think that's different from making a call about whether the infrastructure spend broadly can, one, meet demand, or two, become profitable. I think that is still a slight unknown from the evidence that I've seen. Like, it's hard not to refer to it as a bubble in some sense, because just the volume of activity in the space. And there's people out there who are producing quite nuanced material, Zimas are, for example, on like what early indicators for a bubble may or may not be. But if it is a bubble, it's not like a .com bubble, I don't think. It's an infrastructure bubble. Like, the thing that's being manifestly produced will have value. Now, you could argue that value is amortized incorrectly or depreciate much quicker than anticipated. But I don't necessarily buy that. I think that our current software, if you think of this technology stack as like hardware, software, and applications, where what I'm calling software is not so much the applications, but the AI and the models, and that middle tier is massively under optimized. The whole point about DeepSeek is that they were forced to innovate in a way that showed you that part of the software stack was massively under optimized. And I think, and that's just one existence proof. Like, I think that probably that's the case for all sorts of things in the way that we haven't imagined.
Right.
in the way that you, for example, alpha tensor or, alpha, there's an alpha search one. So using the model to find new ways to do matrix multiplication, or use the model to find new ways to do search, and so on and so forth. Like the more the model becomes part of the production loop, the more we will realize just how bad a load of stuff is that we currently take for granted. And that, I think that in my head, that means that the life cycle of depreciating hardware is a lot longer than it probably is in the current financial models. Like the current financial model is like, you build it for this period of time and then it will kind of be useless. And you're like, no, I think the AI is going to extend into that lifetime of that hardware as well. So it's like, you can't use it for the frontier stuff, but there's a ton of stuff you can use it for. And so like, I think that, I guess my bet there would be that even if there's massive overproduction at this point in history, that the financial model for the value of the stuff that's produced is wrong. So I think even in infrastructure bubble, I'm not suggesting there wouldn't be all sorts of corrections, but I think actually you would recover from it. You'd have a few years where people try to figure out how to recapitalize or reamortize the cost of investment. But I think from my perspective, I think that investment will turn out to be valuable.
Right.
As opposed to everyone sort of sitting there when the music stops and you open the packages, there's nothing inside. There is definitely stuff inside this in a way that there isn't in a pure speculative bubble or a financial bubble, right?
These aren't tulips or massively overvalued properties in,
these aren't
estates,
exactly. So, even in the scenario where most of the bubbleness is manifest, I think everything still plays out pretty convincingly. There's some wobble and there's some correction and there's all sorts of, turbulence that you would rather avoid. But I don't think this is like an emperor's new clothes scenario.
Right. Good. Thank you. Wow. Well, it feels like we've been, from the prosaic to the ridiculous to the partly prompted by my own indulging my own, speculations. But I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would have liked to have spoken about, or you think it's important to know, especially for business leaders or people, in organizations?
I mean, we have underexplored everything that we've talked about, right? So, maybe I'll write some stuff down, post a blog or something. But I think from a leadership perspective, I think probably two takeaways. Like, this is not a fire drill. This isn't hype, right? We have gone through a technology change that will manifestly alter the structure of the way that we do work in ways that we don't understand that yet. But this is not pretend. And the second thing is, this is going to go so much faster than you think. So, you have to start thinking about it now. This is not decades. This is like a decade, or I would say less is my guess. So you have to start now, and you have to start educating yourself, and you have to start educating your workforce, and you have to start figuring out how you're going to deal with it. But it's not going to go away. Which is an uncomfortable truth, I think, for people to really get their head around.
Right. Got it. Well,
there you go. That's what I think.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate the straightforwardness of the message. And I also appreciate your willingness to sort of explore all of the potential facets of this. So
awesome.
Yeah. It's been,
thank you very much.
A fantastic conversation. So it's deep for people who are interested specifically in deep flow. It's deepflow.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the courses, and for any students listening who may be interested in any of the work in the education space,
I still teach on the master's course that Dan accidentally made me set up 10 years ago. I have about 160 master's students on that course, and then I teach 2 MBA classes, one on entrepreneurship actually, and one on technology strategy. And we started actually, UCL School of Management has started doing executive classes. So I did teach a class the other day for KPMG and IBM, for example, in for executives is closed classroom type
Right.
scenario. So if there's larger companies out there that are interested in trying to figure out their approach to some of this, that UCO in principle can help.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you once again, Alastair. It's been a riveting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you.